The air in the forum chamber always tasted a little like static electricity and old metal. It wasn't a place anyone wanted to be, really. Just a giant, cold room floating in the quiet space between stars, filled with chairs shaped for creatures who didn't even have chairs back home. Thousands of species came here. Beings made of light, others like walking rocks, some who communicated by changing colors, all trying to stop the galaxy from tearing itself apart. It was messy. It was slow. It was the only thing keeping the peace. For a long time, the humans were the joke. The new kids, barely out of their own solar system, clumsy with the fancy tech, talking too loud, eating weird-smelling food during breaks. The older species, the ones who'd been arguing for centuries, rolled their many eyes. What could these soft, squishy, emotional creatures possibly contribute? They didn't think in perfect, logical lines like everyone else. They'd get frustrated, tell a silly story, crack a joke that made no sense to anyone but them, or even cry when things got too tense. It was embarrassing, primitive. But then something strange happened. When the arguments got so stuck, the war seemed inevitable, like the time the crystal people merely shattered the gas. Beings home clouds over water rights. The humans would do something unexpected. They wouldn't argue the logic. They'd point out how tired everyone looked. Or share a story about how their people once fought over something just as stupid, and how it felt afterward. Or they'd make a terrible pun that was so awful, it actually made the tension break. A sigh, a reluctant chuckle. Suddenly, the impossible deadlock loosened, just enough. The humans didn't solve things with perfect reason. They solved them by reminding everyone how it felt to be stuck, to be scared, to just want it to be over. They were the weird, messy glue no one knew they needed. The galaxy leaned on them without even realizing it. They became the accidental peacemakers, the ones who stopped the shouting long enough for real talking to maybe happen. Then came the Vega Water Summit. Big stuff. Really big. The crystal people, the Zenther, needed water from the gas clouds controlled by the Nthul. The Nthul said no. The Zenther said they'd die without it. Old arguments flared, sharper and hotter than ever. Everyone knew this was it. If this blew up, the fragile piece holding the galaxy together might snap for good. The forum chamber was packed. Tension hung thick enough to choke on. All eyes were on the small, slightly rumpled section of chairs where the humans usually sat. Chairs shaped for beings with backsides, not energy fields or hovering pods. The meeting started. Voices rose. Accusations flew. The Zenther leader's crystalline form flickered dangerously red. The Nthul representative pulsed with agitated light. Minutes ticked by. Then an hour. The human section stayed empty. Not one chair filled. No familiar scent of coffee or that weird spicy food. No nervous fidgeting. No one clearing their throat to say something awkward but important. A low murmur started. Where are they? At first, it was just confusion. Maybe a transport delay? A misunderstanding? But the humans were never late for something this big. They lived for these messy moments. As the second hour crawled by, the confusion turned icy. Sensors confirmed it. All human ships had left the forum's safe zone days ago. Quietly, without a word. Not even a note, just gone. The arguing didn't stop right away. The Zenther and Nthul kept shouting, but their voices started to sound hollow, like they were performing for an empty room. The other species watched the empty human chairs, then each other. A terrible silence began to creep in, filling the gaps between the angry words. It was the silence of a safety net vanishing mid-fall. One elder from the rock-like species, usually slow to react, finally spoke, his voice a deep grind of stone. The variable is absent. It wasn't just a statement. It was pure dread, Without that messy, illogical human element, the one thing that could cut through the galaxy's rigid, centuries-old thinking, what would happen now? The arguments weren't just loud. They were pointless. There was no one to throw a wrench in the perfect, deadly logic of the deadlock. The vote was called. Simple question. Grant the Zenther limited water access? Yes or no? Centuries of forum tradition demanded a clear answer. The voting lights blinked on. Species after species registered their choice. The results flashed on the central screen. The numbers hung there, frozen. Deadlock. Exactly equal. No majority. No path forward. Just stuck. A collective shiver went through the chamber. Not of anger anymore. Of pure, cold terror. In all the long history of the Forum, a true deadlock on a critical issue like this had never happened. Not once. Because the humans always found a way to break it. Always. Their absence wasn't just inconvenient. It was catastrophic. It proved something horrifying. The entire galaxy, all its advanced civilizations, had been leaning on the shoulders of the one species they considered the least advanced. The humans weren't the weak link. They were the only link holding the whole fragile structure together. And they just let go. The Zenther leader's red flicker turned deep, dangerous crimson. Dunthul's light pulsed erratically, like a failing star. The gas in the chamber felt thick, suffocating. The empty chairs weren't just empty. They were a gaping hole where the solution used to be. The quiet panic wasn't about the water anymore. It was the dawning, sickening realization. The thing that kept them from destroying each other wasn't wisdom or technology. It was the messy, emotional, illogical humanity they'd all quietly mocked. And now it was gone. The galaxy, for the first time in living memory, felt truly, deeply alone. And scared. Very, very scared. The silence after the deadlock vote wasn't peaceful. It was the sound of 1,000 civilizations holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable crash. The Forum hadn't just lost its mediators. It had lost its soul. And everyone in that cold metal room knew with a sinking heart that the long peace was over. The real terror had just begun. Weeks turned into months, and the empty chairs in the Forum chamber stayed empty. At first, everyone thought it was just a mistake. Maybe the humans got stuck on their little blue planet? Maybe their weird, fragile ships broke down? But deep down, the others knew. Humans didn't just forget the most important meeting in centuries. They didn't vanish without a single message, not even a quick sorry, running late. The silence wasn't an accident. It felt deliberate. Like someone had quietly turned off the lights in a room full of people who suddenly realized they were all standing on the edge of a cliff. The arguing didn't stop. Oh no. Without humans to jump in with a dumb joke or a story about their messy family dinners, the old fights just got louder and meaner. Remember the water fight? The crystal beings, the Zenther, and the gas creatures, the Thul, were still screaming at each other. But now there was no human to say, hey, maybe we all just need a nap? Or share a story about how their own people once fought over a river that turned out to be mostly mud. The arguments became like two rocks grinding together, getting sharper and sharper until something had to break. Then, out of nowhere, the insect-like Kaler brought up a fight from 300 years ago. Something about a borderline drawn wrong near a star that wasn't even important anymore. The bird people, the Sylph, got so angry they started flapping their wings hard enough to rattle the metal walls. It was ridiculous. Why bring up ancient history now? But without a human to point out how silly it was, the old anger just bubbled right back up. Hot and fresh. It got worse. Messages stopped being polite. Instead of respected colleagues, notes started with, you know what I think? Or even just angry symbols that looked like clenched fists. The quiet, respectful channels where species used to whisper solutions. They went dark. Now, everyone was shouting on the main comms, trying to drown each other out. It was like watching a bunch of kids who'd lost their teacher start throwing things in the classroom. Only these kids controlled star systems and could turn planets into dust. The fear in the air wasn't just tension anymore. It felt thick and heavy, like trying to breathe underwater. You could see it in the way the light being from the nebula cluster dimmed when arguments started, or how the rock being from the asteroid belt would vibrate slightly, like he was trying not to shake apart. Then came the real shock. Someone, maybe the curious ones who floated like jellyfish, started looking into Earth's records. Not just the meeting notes, but everything. The funny human songs they used to hum, the strange pictures they shared of dogs and pizza, even the notes they scribbled about how confusing everyone else was. It was all gone, not lost, not hacked, erased, like someone had carefully gone through every single file in the galaxy's giant digital library and pulled out every single thing that said human. Poof, vanished. It wasn't just that they left. It was like they were trying to pretend they never existed here. That hit harder than anything. It wasn't abandonment. It felt like rejection. A quiet, terrifying thought crept into every mind. Did we mean so little to them that they just wiped themselves off the map? The worst part? The galaxy started to see how fragile everything really was. All those centuries of peace, all those narrow escapes from war. It wasn't because the older species were so wise or logical. It was only because the humans were there, messing things up in just the right way. They were the weird, emotional glue holding the whole shaky tower together. Without that glue, the tower was starting to lean. The crystal beings and gas creatures nearly started shooting at each other over a misunderstanding about a water sensor reading. The insect people and bird people almost came to blows in the hallway over who got the last nutrient bar from the snack dispenser. Tiny things. Things a human would have laughed off or turned into a silly game. But without that human touch, tiny things felt like the start of the end. People started doing strange things, trying to be human. Someone tried telling a joke, a really bad one about a rock walking into a bar. But no one got it, and the silence was worse than the shouting. A group of diplomats tried sitting in a circle on the floor like they'd seen humans do once, but the gas creatures just floated above it, confused, and the rock being couldn't bend that way. It felt clumsy and fake. They were mimicking the actions, but not the feeling behind them. The warmth, the we're all in this mess together vibe the humans always brought. It was like trying to copy a smile when you're actually terrified. It didn't work. The quiet panic turned into a deep, cold dread. It wasn't just about this fight or that argument anymore. It was the horrifying realization that the entire system, the forum, the peace, the whole idea that thousands of wildly different species could live side by side without tearing each other apart, was built on sand. And the only thing holding that sand together was the messy, emotional, illogical presence of the one species everyone thought was the weakest link. The humans weren't the students here. They were the secret teachers. And they just walked out of the classroom, leaving everyone staring at a broken blackboard with no idea how to fix it. You could feel it in the forum chamber. The air hummed with a new kind of silence, not the quiet of concentration, but the heavy, waiting silence before a storm. The chairs where humans sat gathered dust. The coffee machine they used to fuss over stood cold and empty. Every time the lights flickered, everyone jumped, hoping against hope it was a human ship finally coming back. But it never was. The galaxy wasn't just scared of war breaking out. It was scared of something deeper. The terrifying truth that they weren't as smart or as strong as they thought. They were just lost. Utterly, completely lost without the noisy, emotional, coffee-drinking humans who somehow knew how to make the impossible feel possible. The terror wasn't in the shouting anymore. It was in the quiet moments between the shouts, when everyone looked at the empty space and wondered, what do we do now? And the awful answer whispered back, we never learned. We just let them do it for us. The forum wasn't just broken. The whole idea of peace felt broken too, and the galaxy, for the first time, understood how close to the edge it had always been standing. The humans didn't just leave the room. They took the floor out from under everyone's feet. And now, the long, slow fall was beginning. The archive room smelled like old paper and dust, even though nothing there was made of paper. It was the last place anyone expected to find a human. While the forum chamber echoed with angry shouts and the hallway screens flashed urgent warnings about border clashes, one human stayed behind. Not by choice, by accident, or maybe by design. Nobody knew. They just found him there one day, hunched over a flickering screen, trying to fix the coffee dispenser that had been broken since the others left. He wasn't important, not a leader, not a diplomat. Just someone who sorted through old meeting notes, a quiet presence nobody really noticed until he was the only one left out at first. The others ignored him. What could one human do? But as the galaxy spiraled, the crystal beings and gas creatures nearly destroying a whole star system over a sensor glitch, the insect people and bird people coming to blows in the cafeteria, desperation grew. Someone had to know why. Why would the one thing holding them together just vanish without a word? Without a fight? It felt cruel. It felt like the humans had known something terrible was coming and just walked away. So they cornered him. Not roughly, but with a quiet intensity that was worse. A group gathered outside the archive door. The shimmering light being, the slow-moving rock being, the gas creature pulsing with anxious colors. They didn't demand answers like angry politicians. They looked lost, like children who'd broken their favorite toy and finally realized they never knew how it worked. He looked up from the coffee machine, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. He seemed tired. Not scared, just tired. Like he'd been waiting for this moment. You want to know why we left? He said, his voice rough from disuse. Not why we left the forum. Why we left you. Silence, heavy. The kind where you can hear your own heartbeat. It wasn't because we were scared, he continued, staring at the broken machine. It wasn't because we hated you. Honestly, we loved being here. Messy, loud, sometimes stupid, but real. He paused, struggling for words, the way humans always did. You see, for centuries, we watched you. All of you. The super smart, super logical ones. You'd sit in that big room, arguing for days about the exact angle a border should be drawn, or the precise chemical composition of shared water. Perfect logic. Flawless reasoning. And it got you nowhere. He tapped the side of his head. Your problem isn't that you're not smart enough. It's that you only think with your heads. Straight lines. Cause and effect. Win or lose. It's like trying to build a house using only a ruler. You get straight walls, sure, but no warmth. No feeling for when the wood is good or when the foundation feels wrong. You miss the little things that matter. He looked around at them, his eyes holding a strange mix of sadness and something like pity. We humans? We're messy. We feel things first. Fear, hope, sadness, joy. Sometimes it makes us do dumb stuff. But it also lets us see the other person. Not just their argument, but the tiredness in their eyes. The worry in their voice. When the crystal beings were arguing with the gas creatures over water, we didn't care about the exact percentage of hydrogen. We saw how scared they both were, one of drying up, one of being used up. We saw people, not just positions. He took a shaky breath. We spent years studying you, quietly, We realized your logic was a cage. A beautiful, shiny cage, but a cage all the same. You couldn't feel your way out of a deadlock because you weren't allowed to feel. It wasn't part of the system. So, we became the feeling part. The messy, illogical, human part. We'd crack a joke when things got too tight. Share a story about our own stupid fights. Cry when it got too heavy. Not because we were weak. Because sometimes, that's the only thing that cuts through the ice. His voice dropped almost a whisper. We didn't abandon you. We outgrew needing the forum. Humans. We figured out how to share feelings directly. Not just words. Not just logic. The actual feeling of understanding, of care. It started small. Families, close friends. Then communities. Then everyone on Earth. We didn't need to argue in that cold room anymore because we could feel each other's truth. We finally understood what we'd been trying to tell you all along. He gestured weakly towards the empty forum chamber down the hall. Leaving the forum wasn't running away. It was the hardest thing we ever did. Because we knew, without us there to be the messy, emotional glue, you'd finally be forced to feel your own silence. Your own fear. Your own need for each other. You needed the cage to break so you could feel the air. He looked at them, his eyes glistening. You kept calling us primitive, emotional, illogical, but your perfect logic was the prison. Our illogical feelings? That was the key. We didn't leave because we didn't care. We left because we cared too much to let you stay trapped. You needed us to fail. So you'd finally listen to yourselves. To feel yourselves. He turned back to the coffee machine, his shoulders slumped. The terror you feel now? That's not the terror of war starting. That's the terror of waking up. The terror of realizing the floor you thought was solid was actually just US, holding you up. And now you have to learn to stand on your own. Not with perfect logic, but with something scarier. Something real. Something human. He didn't say another word. He just kept fiddling with the coffee machine. The silence around him thick with a new kind of understanding. Not relief. Not anger. A deep, shuddering realization. The galaxy hadn't lost its strongest pillar. It had lost its crutch. And the long, painful journey to learning how to walk, how to feel, had just begun. The terror wasn't in the empty chairs anymore. It was in the sudden, deafening silence of their own unexamined hearts. They finally understood. The humans hadn't abandoned them. They'd set them free. And freedom, it turned out, was the most terrifying thing of all. The fights didn't stop. If anything, they got louder, angrier, more desperate. Without the human glue, the galaxy felt like a house of cards hit by a strong wind. The crystal beings and the gas creatures nearly started shooting over a tiny mistake. A sensor on a water pipe blinked wrong, and suddenly ships were powering up weapons. Old wounds ripped open fast. The insect people brought up that 300-year-old border argument again, and the bird people got so furious they nearly tore the metal walls with their claws. It was messy. It was scary. Everyone felt it. The ground was shaking, and there was nothing solid to hold on to. But something else was happening too. Something quieter, stranger. People started trying to be human. Not because they suddenly understood the archive room man's words, but because they were terrified and didn't know what else to do. They'd seen humans do simple things that somehow fixed huge problems, and now they were fumbling in the dark, grabbing for anything that looked like it might work. Take the coffee machine. It was still broken in the hallway, the one the humans used to crowd around, laughing and complaining about the bitter taste. One day, a group of diplomats, a shimmering light being, a slow rock being, and a gas creature who usually communicated in soft hums, gathered around it. They didn't know how it worked. They didn't even drink liquid like humans. But they remembered the humans standing there, shoulders relaxed, talking quietly while waiting for the brown liquid. So they just stood there for hours. The rock being tried to mimic holding a cup, awkwardly shaping a chunk of itself. The light being pulsed softly, like a human smile. The gas creature made gentle swirling motions, like steam rising. They didn't talk. They just stood in the quiet hum of the broken machine, hoping the feeling of being together would somehow fix the bigger broken things. It didn't, but for a moment, the shouting down the hall felt a little farther away. Then there were the jokes. Oh, the jokes. Someone, maybe the jellyfish-like thinkers who floated near the ceiling, decided humor was the key. They remembered a human saying something silly like, "Why did the rock cross the nebula?" To get to the other side. It made no sense to them. Rocks didn't walk. Nebulas weren't roads. But they tried it at a tense meeting about mining rights. The room fell silent. Not the good kind of quiet. The heavy, embarrassed kind. The rock being present just vibrated slightly, confused. The gas creature dimmed. It wasn't funny. It felt hollow, like copying a dance step without knowing the music. They realized too late, humans didn't just say jokes. They said them with a look in their eyes, a shrug, a way of leaning in like they were sharing a secret. Without that feeling behind it, the words were just noise. It made them feel even more alone. The worst was the sitting. Humans often sat on the floor in circles, not in stiff rows like the forum chairs. So one day, during a shouting match between the crystal beings and the bird people, someone, a young bird creature, feathers ruffled with stress, suddenly dropped down. Not gracefully, more like a clumsy hop. She sat cross-legged on the cold metal floor, right in the middle of the argument. Everyone froze. The crystal beings stopped flickering red. The bird people stopped flapping. What was she doing? She looked up, nervous but determined. The humans? They sat like this, she chirped, her voice small. When they wanted to hear, she patted the floor beside her. The oldest crystal being, his edges sharp with anger, just stared. Sitting on the floor? For a being made of fragile crystal? It seemed impossible, undignified. They didn't move. Neither did anyone else. The moment passed. The shouting started again. But later, alone, the old crystal being ran a slow scan over his own surface. Could he bend? Just a little? The thought felt strange, almost painful. But the image of the young bird creature, sitting so small and hopeful on the floor, stayed with him. It was everywhere. People tried eating with their hands, a disaster for gas beings who absorbed nutrients. They tried sharing personal stories. Most species had never done that before. It felt dangerously vulnerable. They tried saying, "How are you?" Not as a greeting, but meaning it. The answers were awkward, mumbled, but the trying was there. It was clumsy. It felt fake. Like wearing clothes that didn't fit. They were mimicking the outside of being human. The actions, but the inside feeling, the messy warmth, the real connection, that was missing. It was like trying to bake bread by just looking at a picture of bread. You get flour everywhere, but no warm loaf. Then came the worms. Not real worms. Not exactly. The insect people, the Kaler, and the bird people, the Sylphs, were locked in a nasty fight over who controlled the nutrient-rich asteroid fields, the same fields the bird people used for nesting and the insect people used for farming their tiny, protein-rich grubs. Weapons were almost drawn. Voices were sharp as knives. It felt like the final break. A young Sylph diplomat, her feathers dull with worry, remembered something. Not a human joke. Not a human action. A feeling. She remembered watching a human delegate years ago during a similar fight. The human hadn't argued logic. They looked utterly exhausted, rubbed their eyes, and said quietly, "My people fought over a river like this once." It wasn't about the water. It was about being scared no one else cared if we lived or died. The human had then shared a small, hard biscuit from their pocket, breaking it in half and offering a piece to the angry leader of the other side. It wasn't a treaty. It was just food. Shared. The young Silk diplomat didn't have a biscuit, but she had something else. In her pouch, she carried a single precious larva, a Kaler grub, the kind they farmed. It was a symbol of their food, their life. Her heart hammered like a trapped bird. This was insane. Offering food? To the enemy? In her culture, it meant everything. Trust. Vulnerability. She stepped forward, not to argue, but to stand near the Kaler leader. She held out the small, wriggling grub in her claw. Her voice shook. This is what you farm. What you need. We need the fields too. But maybe we don't have to be enemies over it. She didn't offer it as a bribe. She offered it as a question. A tiny living question. The Kaler leader, a being of hard chitin and sharp mandibles, stared. Not at the grub, but at the Sylph diplomat's eyes. He saw the fear, yes, but he also saw something else, the same exhaustion he felt, the same deep, aching worry for his people. He didn't take the grub. He didn't need to. He simply dipped his head, a slow, deliberate motion. Not a bow, not a surrender, just an acknowledgement. A silent, "I see you. I feel that too." The shouting stopped, not because someone yelled louder, because the air changed. It wasn't fixed. The problem was still huge, but the way they looked at each other, that shifted. Just a fraction. Like the first crack of light after a long, dark storm. They didn't sign a treaty that day. They sat, not on chairs, not on the floor like the humans, but they sat together at a table, the grub still between them, and for the first time in months, they tried to listen to the fear behind the words. Not just the words themselves. It was small. It was fragile. It wasn't perfect. But in that quiet room, with the hum of the broken coffee machine echoing faintly down the hall, the galaxy felt something new. Not terror. Not yet. But the faint, trembling possibility of something else. They were still stumbling in the dark, copying the shape of humanity without really knowing how it felt from the inside. But for the first time, they weren't just mimicking actions. They were feeling their way forward, one clumsy, terrifying, hopeful step at a time. The void was still there, huge and scary. But maybe, just maybe, they were starting to learn how to fill it with something real. Not with logic, but with the messy, risky, beautiful attempt to connect. The long fall hadn't ended, but they'd finally stopped flailing. They were trying, with all their might, to feel their way down. The old forum chamber felt like a tomb. Cold metal walls, stiff chairs, the ghost of 1,000 deadlocked arguments hanging in the air. But today, nobody was there. Instead, they gathered under an open sky on a small, quiet asteroid, a place chosen not by committee, but by someone who remembered humans loved growing things. The ground wasn't metal. It was dirt. Real, messy, smelly dirt. And growing in it? Plants. Simple green things, reaching for the gentle light of a nearby star. The smell of wet soil and growing life filled the space where the scent of fear and static used to be. It wasn't perfect. Old tensions still bubbled. The crystal beings, the Zenther, and the gas creatures, the Nthul, were at it again. But this time, over something small. Who got to use the shared water pipes for the new garden? Voices started to rise, the old familiar edge creeping in. The Zenther leader's crystalline form began that dangerous flicker towards red. Then Thule pulsed with agitated light. The others watched, hearts sinking. Here we go again, they thought. The long fall continues. Then, an elder from the Thule one who had seen the worst of the old forum did something unexpected. Instead of shouting back, she stopped. She closed her many eyes, well, the light organs that served as eyes. And she began to hum. Not a song from her people. A simple, slow tune. A lullaby. One she'd heard a human sing, years ago, to calm a crying child during a tense break in negotiations. The hum was soft, almost lost in the breeze rustling the young plants. It wasn't loud. It wasn't demanding. It was just there. A sound of quiet care. The flickering in the Zenther leader slowed. The sharp red softened to a warm orange. He didn't speak. He just watched the elder hum, her light pulsing gently with the melody. The sound wasn't fixing the water pipes. It wasn't arguing logic. It was saying, without words, I remember. I remember what peace felt like. I remember the humans showed us it was possible. The sharp edges of anger didn't vanish, but they softened like ice melting in warm sun. The arguing stopped. Not because someone won, because the need to win right then suddenly felt small, unimportant compared to the quiet hum in the garden. Later, as the group sat together, not in stiff rows, but on the soft ground, legs tucked under them, hands resting in the cool dirt, a maker's representative, beings of Livingstone, did something else. He reached into a pouch made of woven plant fibers, another human-inspired idea, and pulled out a single, uncut crystal. Not a weapon, not a tool, just a rough, beautiful piece of raw stone, still holding the marks of the earth it came from. He didn't say anything grand. He simply placed it gently on the soil between the Zenther and Thule delegates. A silent offering, a symbol. Look, it seemed to say, this is where we come from. This is what we share. It's fragile. It's precious. Why break it? No one spoke for a long time. The crystal caught the starlight, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the dirt. The Zenther leader reached out a slow, careful limb. Not to take it, not to claim it, just to gently touch its surface, feeling its cool roughness. Then the elder let her light drift over it, illuminating its inner depths. The shared understanding wasn't written down. It wasn't voted on. It just settled over them, warm and quiet, like the evening light. The water pipe dispute? It would be worked out. Not through rigid rules, but through talking while tending the garden, while sharing the simple food grown in the shared soil. The problem hadn't disappeared. But the fear behind the problem, the terror of scarcity, the belief that sharing meant losing, that had begun to fade. This was the new way. Messy, imperfect, full of moments where old habits tried to creep back. Someone might still snap, a light might flicker dangerously. But then, someone else would remember. They'd crack a real joke this time, not a copped one, but a silly observation about a plant growing sideways. They'd share a piece of fruit, sticky and sweet, without thinking about who gave more. They'd sit in silence together, not because they were angry, but because the quiet felt good, felt connected. They learned to pause, to take a breath, to look not just at the words someone was saying, but at the tiredness in their stance, the worry in their light, the way their chitin seemed duller than usual. They started feeling the room, not just hearing the arguments. The terror was gone. Not replaced by perfect peace, but by something deeper, reverence. A quiet awe for the fragile, beautiful thing they were building together, right there in the dirt. They finally understood what the humans had tried to show them all along. Peace wasn't a treaty signed in a cold room. It wasn't winning an argument. It wasn't even about solving every single problem perfectly. Peace was the feeling in the garden when the humming started. It was the shared look over a rough crystal. It was the willingness to get your hands dirty, planting seeds together, knowing the harvest would be shared. It was trusting, even just a little bit, that the other person wasn't your enemy, but someone else who was also scared, also tired, also just trying to make things grow. They didn't talk about the humans much. Not with big speeches, but you could feel them everywhere. In the way a delegate would instinctively offer food before speaking. In the way meetings sometimes started with a moment of quiet, just listening to the wind in the leaves. In the way conflicts were handled not by shouting louder, but by someone saying, "Hey, are you okay?" Meaning it. The humans hadn't left a blueprint. They'd left a feeling. And slowly, stumblingly, the galaxy was learning to feel it for themselves. Sitting there, under the gentle starlight, hands stained with earth, sharing simple food grown from shared water and shared effort. The old fear felt like a bad dream. The long fall had ended. They hadn't crashed. They'd landed. Not on solid, perfect logic, but on something far stronger. The warm, messy, living ground of understanding. They weren't human. They never would be. But in that quiet garden, tending their shared patch of dirt, they were finally, truly, learning how to be people. And for the first time, the galaxy didn't just watch the stars. It felt, deep in its core, like it belonged among them. The silence now wasn't the silence of terror. It was the peaceful quiet of a job well done, a long journey finding its rest. They were home, together, and it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.